walking along Charlestown, wishing you were in Banner Strand, holding your nephew's hands. We walked along the waterfront, up Bunker, down on Main. We met at the monument, where everyone knew our names. Our first kiss on 40 flights, our friends on the stoop on summer nights. The church door was always open as the bells rang out for you and me, for all to see on our wedding day. There's an immigrant soul under.
Good evening and welcome to Charlestown Live. I'm Tom Coots and I'll be your host for this evening's program. Before we get started, I'd like to just thank our partner, Charlestown Against Drugs, and our sponsor, Partners Healthcare, which includes the following. Partners MGH Charlestown at the Healthcare Center, MGH Institute of Health Professionals, the Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital, and the MGH Sharps program. Without their generous support, we would not be able to bring this program to you tonight. Well, before I introduce our guests, I have a couple of announcements to make. There are some things going on in Charlestown this weekend that we want to make you aware of. First is that the Abraham Lincoln Post annual cornhole tournament, and yes, I did say that right, annual cornhole tournament is canceled for this weekend. They're going to reschedule in the fall. I guess a lot of people are on vacation and wanted to be there and they couldn't, so they're going to postpone that event, which was supposed to take place this Saturday. But this Saturday, Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital is having a free health promotion and injury prevention fair at their location at 300 First Avenue in Charlestown. It's going to be geared toward children. They're going to be having Sparky the Fire Dog, face painting, bike helmet fittings, and car seat demonstrations. So if you want to go down to the Navy Yard, it's a fun, free afternoon. That will be this Saturday, July 12th from 1 to 4, rain or shine. One of the other announcements I'd like to make about an upcoming event is something that's going to be new. Mayor Walsh is having Mondays with the Mayor. He's already had a few in Alston, Brighton, and in Roxbury. But this coming Monday, July 14th, at 6:30 p.m. at the Bunker Hill Community College, Mayor Walsh will be there to answer a bunch of questions. It's part of his open door policy. He wants to talk to the people in the neighborhoods and have them be able to feel that they can come to him with questions, problems, and concerns. So those are the events that we've got coming up in Charlestown this weekend. Before I introduce my guest, most of you who know me know how much I love history. I'm a big history buff, involved in the Charlestown Historical Society, the Charlestown Militia Company, and Bunker Hill Monument Association. And when you think of Charlestown, you always think of old Ironsides, the USS Constitution, but the thing that most people think about is the Battle of Bunker Hill. And I just love studying and reading about the Battle of Bunker Hill. There's been a couple of really great books over the last couple of years having to do with the Battle of Bunker Hill. And so for tonight, I want to talk about the Battle of Bunker Hill. And I have with me as my guest a good friend of mine, Professor Michael Bonislawski, Professor of History at Cambridge College and historian for the Charlestown Militia Company, and I'm very happy to have you with us tonight. Thank you for being here, Mike.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited about doing this.
You know, when I first talked to Mike about coming and speaking here tonight, I said it'll be just like some of those discussions we've had, only it won't be 3 hours long when we get into the discussion. So I know we probably won't be able to get all of what we want to talk about done tonight, so I plan on having Mike on again in the future. But tonight I want to touch on a few subjects having to do with the Battle of Bunker Hill. Everyone knows the Battle of Bunker Hill took place on June 17, 1775. Everyone knows that the Battle of Bunker Hill took place on Breed's Hill. Everyone knows that the British won, but we don't really know why some of those things happened. So hoping tonight with Mike we can have a little bit of a conversation to discuss some of those issues. First question I'd like to ask is, why was Charlestown Heights so important to both the British Army and the colonial army of New England? You know, we talk about Bunker Hill, Breed's Hill, and Moulton's Hill or Moulton's Point, and three of those comprise what's known as Charlestown Heights. But why did that battle take place there? Why was there a battle there?
Sure. Before I answer that, though, let's look at a couple of maps so we can orientate ourselves and see what we're talking about. If we can look at that first map.
Yeah.
Can we? Oh, there. This map is an overlay, and it shows the present boundaries today and what the boundaries were back in the 1630s.
Okay.
And if you look at the sort of top and to the left, that's the Charlestown Peninsula.
Okay.
And you can see how it narrowed down to a very thin point. If you were going to cross over from the mainland into Charlestown, you only had that little connection, that little arm.
What they call Charlestown Neck?
Yes, that's the neck. And the dark area around Charlestown is what's been filled in. And it might be interesting to note all the hills, including Bunker Hill and Breeds Hill, Prospect Hill and Somerville and Cobble Hill, all those hills were chopped off to use to fill in the harbor. And that's where you get that dark area from. That's where the earth comes from to fill.
So they broke down the hills, filled in the area. So what we see now in Charlestown for hills and Bunker Hill and Breeds Hill would have been even higher?
Oh, much taller, yes, yes. And also, if you follow Charlestown and you cross the bay and you go into what is now Boston, you'll see Boston in 1630 was also connected by a very narrow, long neck.
Okay.
So it made defending Boston quite easily and attacking it quite difficult, because all you have to defend is this little neck.
Okay.
And traveling further south, you can see the Dorchester Neck, or what was called Dorchester Heights, and that becomes strategically important too.
Okay.
If we could just switch to that next map now.
The next map? Okay.
Yeah. In this map, you can see the area that was more reflective of what it was like in 1630. And you can see the dotted areas. A lot of that area is swamp, and it's made sense to fill it in.
Right.
And that's why they do it. But just so you have an idea of the areas that we're talking about.
So the landscape back in 1775 looked dramatically different than it would today.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And even though they show farther out in the harbor is quite clear, it was actually very treacherous to sail through there. There were a lot of shoals and there were a lot of mud flats that moved with the tides. So people, captains of ships were taking a big risk even coming in. And I only point those things out because now, here we are in 1775, and Gage, General Gage, with about 5,000 men, is hemmed into that little area that we call Boston. And in fact, he has to try to break out. He's got to figure out some way he can get out of Boston proper. So he's constantly hammering the British Parliament saying, I can't do anything unless I have reinforcements,
right.
unless I have more men. And the king eventually gives in and sends him another complement of men, and it brings it up to about 6,000 soldiers he has in Boston. And also the king sends the three generals, William Howe, John Burgoyne, and Henry Clinton. And they begin planning how to break out. What are they going to do? And the plan was to take Dorchester Heights. They were going to sail across and attack Dorchester Heights.
So even before the thought of Bunker Hill, they were going to take Dorchester Heights.
They were going to take Dorchester Heights. They were going to work their way down Dorchester Neck and attack Roxbury, because there were troops, militiamen stationed in Roxbury.
Okay.
All right? And actually set up what you'd say in military terms as a pincer movement. They were going to be coming in one side, and then the second phase of the plan was to attack Charlestown, was to take Charlestown Heights, with the same idea, with a large enough force, and then they could travel around in a circle and basically attack Cambridge. That's where the brunt of the Continental Army is.
So a few minutes earlier, you mentioned how the land was filled in eventually, and that in 1775 it would have looked dramatically different than it did today. So obviously, Charlestown Heights and Dorchester Heights must have been a vantage point.
Yes.
So I suppose if you put some cannons up there, you can control
Absolutely.
the entire Boston Harbor.
Well, that was what the British feared most. If the colonials had taken Dorchester Heights, then they would be able to stop any reinforcements, any type of supplies coming into Boston. And they really were petrified of that. And likewise, once they took Charlestown Heights, it would be easy to lob, cannonades across and really bomb Boston if they wanted to. So that was their plan. That's what they wanted to do. And that was maybe around June 12th, June 13th, they had formulated this plan. Now, there's a story that says they were discussing it over dinner one night, and they don't know if he was just a colonial gentleman or if he was actually a spy for Artemus Ward. You don't really know. But there was someone that overheard the plan and went to Artemus Ward, who was the commander of the rebel forces, and said, "Look, they're going to attack us." So Ward, who was loyal to the rebels, loyal to the rebel cause, but he was very conservative, and he was getting old, and he could hardly ride his horse anymore, and he was worried, and he said, "Oh, I better do something." So he calls for a war council on the Cambridge Common, where William Prescott and John Stark and Israel Putnam, and Gridley all met him, and they discussed what they could do about it, and that's how they came up with the plan. Well, we'll get to Charlestown Heights before they do.
So up until this point, the Army of New England, the colonials, and I know a lot of time we talk about the American Army and the British Army, but there really wasn't an American Army yet. The Continental Army had not been created. George Washington had not been commanded.
Not here, yeah.
So this is an army just made of New Englanders.
Right.
Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island.
Yes, and there's another caveat that essentially said, look, we called all these people out because of the Lexington alarm, right? We call all these Minutemen out, and they show up, and what? We're going to send them home? We're not going to do anything with them? And on Cambridge Common, when we get to June, there's about 20,000 militiamen. So it's quite a large force.
So the British Army were encamped on Boston Common.
Right.
And the Army of New England were on Cambridge Common.
Right.
So they marched from Cambridge Common to Charlestown to fortify the hill.
Yes.
Okay.
That was the plan.
Okay.
In fact, there's a monument, there's a little headstone on the Cambridge Common that says from this spot, Prescott started out with 1,200 men. And headed over to Charlestown Heights, crossed the neck, onto the heights, and in the middle of the night. I mean, they didn't really want the British to know, right?
Right.
Well, we have maps from the time period drawn by British engineers and British cartographers that call it Charlestown Heights. Right. They don't call it Bunker Hill or Breed's Hill. They don't give it any name. And the truth is, where were you grazing your cattle? That's the name of the hill.
Right.
They took the family name, and so the local people would say, "Oh, well, that's Breed's Hill. That's where Farmer Breed, grazes his cattle." But it's not a official, city-sponsored name kind of thing.
Well, and by this time in 1775, both the Bunkers and the Breeds were no longer even in
Right.
Charlestown. They had gone. But the name had just, had been there from before.
And I also know that it's hard to imagine today because, like I say, the hills have been chopped off and things have been leveled out to build roadways and so forth. But Breed's Hill is actually a spur. It's actually an extension of Bunker Hill. Mm-hmm. So calling it Bunker Hill really isn't incorrect. I mean, technically, it's the same geological formation, if you want to get technical about it. But so people dispute that, they fight over that. But I think it's really a small point when we're talking about what happened there.
So when people discuss, they fought on the wrong hill, they really didn't, because technically it was all part of the same formation.
It's Charlestown Heights. And fighting on Breed's Hill, going out on the spur, is not a mistake. I mean, sometimes you'll read in different accounts that it was a mistake. He didn't know what hill he was on. Well, Prescott was a very astute man and very successful farmer and businessman, and had experience, military experience in the French and Indian War. He wasn't just someone that said, okay, it's my turn to lead a battle. You know, no, Ward picked him because he knew Prescott knew what he was doing.
Now, you and I have had this discussion before. We've talked about, was it a strategic move or was it a tactical move? And in the beginning, I used to say, well, it was a strategic move. He thought this out. And you said it was more of a tactical move. When he got there, he realized that this was the best spot to fortify.
Right.
So under the cover of darkness, 1,200 men marched from Cambridge Common to the Charlestown Heights. And overnight, they were able to fortify an area. Now, these men weren't so much soldiers, even though they were part of the New England Army, but they were farmers.
Yes.
So one thing they knew how to do was to dig and how to build.
Yep.
So in the cover of darkness, in the matter of maybe 6 hours, they were able to throw up fortifications that totally blew the minds of the British Army and the British Navy.
Yes, that's exactly right. You know, Prescott, like I say, they arrive on the top of Bunker Hill, and he says, I wasn't there, I don't know. I'm guessing, you know, that he says, wait a minute. They won't even see us. If we build a redoubt here, no one's even gonna know we're here. So he wanted to get closer. And of course, from Breed's Hill, a couple of artillery pieces, they could in fact disrupt shipping and they could fire on Boston. So he saw it as...
So this wasn't even a preventative or a cautionary movement. This was in your face, hey, we're here. What are you going to do?
Well, that's why I said Ward's got 20,000 men. He's got to do something with them. You know, let's take advantage of the situation, and that's what I think Prescott saw. I also want to point out one of the I guess you'd say unusual aspects of the rebel forces is that commanders acted very independently.
Right.
You know, and that Ward may have given the general order to go and fortify, you know, Charlestown Heights. But Prescott was going to have his own way. I mean, that's what they... In fact, Ward was the commander-in-chief. He's actually our first commander-in-chief, you know, commanding these forces. And Israel Putnam was given the title of general, but he was the field commander. Ward was the administrative commander.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? So here you have Putnam saying, oh, no. He said to fortify, you know, Bunker Hill, we're going to Bunker Hill. And you got Prescott saying, oh, no, wait a minute now. He put me in command of the 1,200 men. I'm going to Breed's Hill. You know, so they had this debate. Like I say, I wasn't there, but knowing the personalities and reading about the personalities of these two commanders, it gives, you know, I'm extrapolating out, but it gives me some sense that, no, I think they had a debate, and I think Prescott won out.
Well, obviously Prescott won out. History does tell us that three of the officers got together, and the three officers were Gridley, Prescott, and Putnam. Right. And you know, Putnam, you know, Old Put they called him. He was a French and Indian War fighter, but so wasn't Prescott. As a matter of fact, I believe Prescott was asked to even join the British Army. He was offered a commission, but he chose not to do that. So you've got these, you know, individuals that are all strong-headed, and I think that, you know, Prescott definitely knew what he wanted to do. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't even a last-minute, gee, I think this might be better. I think he had full intention of putting it right where he wanted it to be.
Yes, I believe that too. Yes.
Well, before we go on, I just want to say this is a live call-in show. I know we're 20 minutes into it, but if you have any questions for Professor Bonislawski or for myself, the number here is 617-708-3290. That's 617-708-3290. So if you have any calls or comments or compliments on how wonderful the show is going, please call in and just let us know. So we know that they set it up purposely. They picked Breed's Hill or Bunker Hill, but they picked the location purposely. Now we've got the armies of New England and the armies of Great Britain. And so you mentioned earlier that General Gage was the overall commander, and the three officers came in. You've got Clinton, you've got Howe, and you've got Burgoyne. And so they all were on the field that day, and they were leading the attack. But who were some of the men under Prescott and Putnam on the Army of New England? You had mentioned on the green that John Stark was there from New Hampshire.
Even though Prescott was the commander of the 1,200 men, they were made up of 3 regiments, his own personal regiment, but there was also Colonel Fry and Colonel Bridge also had their regiments there, but they were like second in command to Prescott.
Okay.
And there was also about a 200-man detachment under Captain Knowlton. Thomas Knowlton,
from Connecticut, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And he's significant because and he's important to mention because when he arrives, they send him down, and he's the one that builds up the fortifications down there, the river.
Down by the rail fence.
The rail fence. Yeah.
I'm going to stop you right there because there's someone else that I want to talk about, another officer I want to talk about in addition to Knowlton, which is Colonel Thomas Gardner, someone that's near and dear to both of us.
Yep.
But we actually have a caller. Caller, are you there?
Yes, I am, Tom. This is Jean Tochterman from the Monument Association.
How are you,
also,
Jean?
I'm well tonight.
Great.
Very interesting conversation.
Thank you.
My question is, remember about a year or so ago, there were bones that were found up in that area. Has anything more been discovered? And I'm going to hang up and let you answer on the line, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
To my knowledge, there was some talk about finding some remains that they believed may have been the remains of British soldiers. After the battle, they were just mass graves. They didn't take the individuals and bury them individually. Even Dr. Warren, who was there, was thrown in a mass grave. But the remains, as far as I know, that they found up there, nothing more has been done because some of the remains, it's my understanding, were on private property. And the owners of the property didn't want them to go any further for fear that they would end up digging up their entire yard. So I don't know, but I will look into that, and the next time we discuss Bunker Hill, hopefully I'll have an answer for that. But as we were talking about Thomas Knowlton of Connecticut going down to the rail fence, someone that's near and dear to both of us, Colonel Thomas Gardner, who Gardner's regiment had a contingent of men from Charlestown.
Yes.
And they got into the battle on the hill a little bit later because they were stationed over at Leechmere Point on the Cambridge area.
Well, the original attack or foray into the countryside, the British forces had landed at Leechmere Point and waded ashore and then marched out to Lexington and conquered. And Ward, mindful of that, was worried that here it is, we're going to stick ourselves out on the neck, and they could land on Leechmere Point again and just come up behind us. And he was worried about that happening. So he dispatched Thomas Gardner, Colonel Gardner, and his regiment out to Leechmere Point to guard that entry point. And again, the story is kind of hazy. It's told different ways by different authors at the time.
Right.
But my understanding is he was sitting on Leechmere Point. He had about 1,000 men, of which the Charlestown Militia Company was part of his contingent. And he could see the fighting. He could hear it happening out, on Breed's Hill. So he decided whether it was himself or whether he was ordered to, I don't know. But someone decided that he's not going to stay there. And he starts to make his way around to go up the neck himself. Okay. And what they end up doing is implanting themselves to the right of Bunker Hill. And he put all his men behind trees and rocks and, fences and so forth, and gave covering fire as the Americans were retreating. And actually saved a lot of lives by doing that, which was really important. And for his trouble, he received a fatal wound, and Thomas Gardner died 3 weeks later. But once you get a gut shot, that's it.
That's it.
You die.
So they were able to cover the retreat of the Army of New England as they
Right.
So we've talked about some of the more famous individuals that were there who fought on both sides, but probably the individual that is probably nearest and dearest to most of the people in the viewing audience is Major General Joseph Warren, Dr. Warren, the beloved man who, although he was not from Charlestown, spent a lot of time in Charlestown, was very instrumental in a number of different areas. It was Dr. Warren who sent Paul Revere on his midnight ride, Dr. Warren who conversed back and forth with the Committee of Safety in Charlestown. He had just been promoted to Major General a few days before the battle, and he showed up, but he didn't take charge. Even though he was a Major General, he showed up as a private soldier.
Well, let me just start off by saying one of the things I love about Joseph Warren is this. All of them, all the famous people, whether you want to look at John Adams or Sam Adams or John Hancock or any of them, when this was going on, they were on their way to Philadelphia to meet with the Continental Congress,
Right.
Which is where Warren was supposed to go. He was the president of the Provincial Congress here in Massachusetts, and he was supposed to go to Philadelphia. And he refused to go. And he said, I belong up on Bunker Hill. And he didn't even have a horse. He had to commandeer some horse from someone riding by. He took the horse and he said, I'm sorry, but he made his way over to Bunker Hill. And of course, it was a great morale booster. I mean, the men that were there were so glad to see him that he would come and fight beside them. Now, his commission hadn't arrived yet. Even though Congress had approved it, he hadn't officially been given, any papers saying he was a Major General. But so what he does is he sees Prescott, and Prescott, graciously bows and says, "Take the command." And Warren said, "No, I wouldn't change anything. And besides that, I'm not a general yet."
So as we know, he was there. He was a great morale booster. He ended up dying on the third and final charge.
Right.
And will live forever in everyone's hearts. We're out of time already, and we've still got so much to talk about. So I will ask you now, at a later date, I know you're a busy man, will you come back at a later date and we'll talk a little more?
Oh, I'd be happy to, absolutely.
That's great. So just as we get ready to close out tonight, thank you all for tuning in. Once again, we want to thank our partner, Charlestown Against Drugs, and our sponsor, Partners Healthcare. Charlestown, as always, I remain yours. I'm Tom Coots. Good night. God bless.